Psalm 46, if you'd like to go ahead and turn to Psalm 46, we will begin there. All these teenagers have to have their wisdom teeth removed. I've still got mine. I think that's something that's more common now than it used to be. Was all our kids, by the time they got to be teenagers, they were growing crooked and they had to remove them. Well, I guess Tommy Holly's going through puberty. He had to have a wisdom tooth pulled today, so he's at home. Remember Tommy. I said a few weeks ago that I might not cover your favorite psalm, and we kind of hit on one side or the other of some of those. Some folks love Psalm 19, some really love Psalm 23, and so we kind of really hit all around those. Psalm 46 might be one of those. At least part of it may be one of your favorites. It is within Psalm 46 that you have a lot of very significant statements, and probably one of those that you know very well from the Psalms is Psalm 46 verse 10. Be still and know that I'm God. That's where you find this one. Psalm 46 begins with a statement about God being our refuge. He is our strength. He's our help. That statement, as it begins, lets us see that this psalm is a psalm about God, about God's strength, about where we turn when we have difficulty, about the hardships that come and the things that arise, and there is a place to turn and somewhere to go when those things happen. In the first three verses, he talks about some kind of cataclysmic upheaval. Now, this could be symbolic. It could just be talking about the very idea that the foundations of the earth are shaken, or it could really be that there are some kind of natural calamities that come upon us, and there's a place to turn when that happens. In verses 4 through 7, he's talking about the raging of the nations. He begins verse 4 to say, there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. And then in verse 6, he talks about the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts. So the verses 4 through 7 are kind of about the relationship that God has with nations and how God deals with those, how His strength is greater than all of those. So you have that section, I think, in this psalm, verses 4 through 7. And then in 8 through 11, there's this activity that goes on as he opens that section up, that paragraph. It's really hard to divide into paragraphs, maybe sections. Come behold the works of the Lord. It's talking about the magnificence of the Lord. It speaks of His ability and the faith which we should have in Him, and how He takes care of the enemies. And then he closes out verses 10 and 11, be still and know that I'm God. And verse 11, the Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. So like in many psalms, he opened it up and ended it in much the same way. So that's what happens in Psalm 46. So one of the things that is highlighted in those first three verses is that we have no need to fear. Whatever comes, there is no need for us to fear. Why does he say there's no need to fear? God is my refuge, right? It's clear. There is no need to fear because God is my refuge. God is my strength. He is our help. Somebody go ahead and read. We just probably need to read Psalm 46. Somebody read 1 through 3.
Strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling.
By the way, I think this is true. I've heard this before, but I also found in some of my reading that this inspired Martin Luther's "A Mighty Fortress Is My God," our God, that song. He says that God is our refuge. He is our strength. He is our help. He is our very present or ever present. I think it's translated both ways. That literally, I think even some translations have added this footnote. He makes himself to be found exceedingly. That is ever present, isn't it? I've used this illustration before, but if you want to get in touch with me, more than likely you can get me on my cell phone, but I might not be available. Usually I am, but I might not be. But from this perspective, what the psalmist is saying is that there's not a time when he's not available. There's not a moment when he is not there to be our help or our refuge or our strength. Somebody asked one time, and I don't know how to answer this exactly, but they asked the question, what would happen if God fell asleep for just a minute? What would happen? Well, it wouldn't be fun, I'm afraid. According to Colossians, that Jesus holds all things together. And so I'm afraid that things might begin to kind of fall apart like an engine running away or something like that. But so this psalm begins with this idea that He is our fortress. By the way, that word fortress is something that we don't use. We don't use that word very much anymore to describe what we are. Refuge maybe is the best idea that we can put there. He is our sure defense. He is that which will provide any protection for any enemy that is needed. He is our refuge. He is our strength. He is our help. He is ever present or very present in time of trouble. He's accessible. He's always there. It doesn't matter what kind of trouble. It doesn't matter where we are. He is accessible. So any observations you'd like to make about those first three verses?
The margin of my Bible says well proved in relationship to that very present.
Okay.
So well proved.
Well proved.
Not only is He always there, but He's proven to you that you can depend on Him.
That's a good observation, because the idea of Him having proven Himself is significant as well. If someone has proven themselves to be dependable, then that gives us some really good confidence in Him.
Does away with the health and wealth doctrine.
Yes, it does. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the idea that everything's going to be rosy if you follow Him seems to be done away with in the Psalms quite often, because those who are following God are crying out to God for help and rescue. My enemies are overwhelming me. My health is failing. Everything's bad. How long are you going to let this go on? Good observation. Can I say that again?
In order to be like what it says, therefore will not be feared, though the earth be removed, and all those other things, and you have to really be God is our refuge and
Oh, exactly. Yes. You have to really believe verse 1, because when you get to verses 2 and 3, that's going to be tested, Mello says. when the very foundations of your world are being shaken, your faith is going to be tested. That's true. Okay, in verses 4 through 7, there's the threat of opposing nations. Now, as I mentioned before here in Psalm 46, those first three verses really talk about God is our help, or we will not fear because God is our help. And then when you look at 4 through 7, there's the confidence that God will help his people with the significant threats that come from opposing nations. Somebody read those verses 4 through 7, if you would, please.
There is a river, the stream whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. God of Jacob is our refuge.
Okay, very good. He begins by talking about the streams in the city of God. If he's talking about Jerusalem, he's really using a word picture there to describe blessings, it seems. The very idea of a river running through Jerusalem is it's just not there. So you have evidently a word picture that would describe God's blessings and how, like a river flowing through a city, God's blessings would flow through the city of Zion. And that, I think that's in opposition to what we find in verse 3, because back in verse 3 he talks about the waters roar and foam and mountains tremble and swell. He's talking about violent waters there. But what does he say about this river, this water that he's talking about? There's rivers whose streams make glad. It's a calming river. It's a good river. It's a blessing river. It is in opposition to the violent waters in verse 3 that would cause us to fear. So here he makes this contrast between the two waters. It's a water that brings blessing. So now he says that God is going to help. God is able to. The danger is present. Though the nations rage and the kingdoms totter, he utters his voice and the earth melts. Now it's right about here that the threat of danger seems to be lessened as you move through Psalm 46. Because it began with some very frightening signs of danger, didn't it? The mountains and the earthquakes and the waters and all that's going to be violent and shaking and scary stuff. But now he's moving toward something that is much more secure. He's talking about the river that runs through the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in her midst. Verse 8, 6, the nations rage, the kingdoms totter, and he utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. There's the word I was using a while ago. So when you look at this section, and you know that without any shadow of a doubt, the psalmist is saying God helps his people. He blesses his people. He is like a river in giving a bountiful blessing into his people. And he reigns, and he controls, and he rules, and he defends all dangers that come. Okay, any observations through those verses there? Mm-hmm. It is, isn't it?
Okay, well, what about during the night?
Through the night, yes.
Sometimes you just put your head down and make it through the darkness until the light comes on the other side.
That's a great observation. English Standard, what Gary was mentioning, says that he will
Help her when morning dawns.
help her when morning dawns. I was looking at the wrong verse. Yeah, that's verse 5. So sometimes you just have to put your head down and make it through the darkness of night till the dawn comes. But we've already seen in the beginning of the psalm that God is our refuge, our ever-present help in time of need. He's our strength. So if we can't make it till dawn, then we've got a problem with verse 1. Okay, let's, as we move on through this, that verse that I mentioned that is one of those that you probably are familiar with is verse 10. There's this very powerful concept and powerful expression of the divine and his power and his overwhelming desire for us to have relationship with him and for us to recognize his presence and his power, to recognize all these things that the Psalms already talked about. Oftentimes we take verse 10 and we pull it out and we say, you know, this is a very good verse. It's on home interiors and it's on our keychains and it's everywhere else. But in the context of all of this, the psalmist is saying, I've given you the formula for you to have confidence and a calmness. I've given you that formula that would allow you to look around you and see that God is still in control. He's still in charge. He has the power. He's still controlling all the nations of the world. He's still in all of that. And he controls the nations of the world. He's going to take care of all of that. Now verse 10, be still and know that I'm God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So in that context comes verse 10. And then verse 11 follows it. I think they're connected. And I don't know why you would separate them. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Those two verses really kind of bring this psalm together and tie it up in a neat bow, because the world's shaking around you. The very foundations of the earth are being shaken, and there are nations that are threatening, and things are not going the way you think they ought to go. Don't forget, God is your refuge. God is your strength. God is your ever-present help. He is still in control. He's still in charge. Stop, think about it, observe, know that I am God. Be still and know that I'm God. That's why that's one of my favorite psalms.
While the world is burning down around you, be still and know that I am God.
That's perfect. Gary says, while the world's burning down around you, be still and know that I'm God. Yeah. I mean, that's probably a very good summation. And if you think that a marauding nation is going to come in and destroy you, well, don't forget, God's still in control. If you think that some kind of natural disaster is going to take you away and take you out of here, God's still in control. Whatever happens, be still, know that I'm God. I am the Lord of hosts, and I am with you.
Some people say he's still on plan A.
He's still what?
He's still on plan A.
Plan A?
Doesn't go on plan B.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, one of the reasons I wanted to look at Psalm 46 is because of Psalm 47. So we're right there. So let's look at Psalm 47 now, because at the center of Psalm 47 is the kingship of God. And remember, when we started the study, one of the things that we highlighted was that there are several psalms that are what are called royal psalms that talk about the kingship of God. And this is one of those that really highlights the idea of the kingship of God. It will celebrate Him. It will take time to talk in great depth about who God is. It really is probably divided into three parts, like the last one. Verses 1 through 4, 5 through 7, and then 8 and 9 very likely are three divisions. And one of the reasons you'll notice that maybe that's the divisions of the psalm is because of in the original translations, the word Selah, which is a musical term, follows after verse 7 as well. So that seems to be a third separation. I think some commentators only divide it into two parts, which is really not a big deal. But let's look at 1 through 4. Obviously, that's the first section of this psalm because it is a promise of the fact that God is king. He is enthroned on his over his kingdom, and he has taken dominion over his people. And this would be a great psalm for the Israelites to sing while they are together in the temple. It would be one of those great ones to sing anytime, as many of our hymns are as well. So somebody read 1 through 4 of Psalm 47, if you would, please.
Clap your hands, all peoples. Shout to God with loud songs of joy. For the Lord, the Most High, is to be feared, a great king over all the earth. He subdued peoples under us and nations under our feet. He chose our heritage for us, the bride of Jacob, whom he loves. Okay, very good. Now, in those verses, he highlights some very significant ideas. One of those is the idea of clapping your hands and shouting shout to God with loud songs of joy. Your translation may vary a little bit, but the idea is still the same. For the Lord, the Most High, is to be feared. So the worship that goes on, the adulation, the worship, the praise, the honor, the awe that would be present in them as they come to worship God. For He is the Most High God. He is to be feared. Because verse 2, he says He is the Most High, to be feared. He's the great King over all the earth. Now, before I go any further, let me ask you a question, because it doesn't say, as he opens it up, he doesn't say, you people of Jacob or you who are of Zion. He says, all peoples. What is the significance of that in verse 1, where he says, he doesn't limit it to the Israelites, but he says everybody. Is there something significant about beginning this psalm that way? Nobody has an idea, huh? Well, eventually everybody is going to be coming to praise the Lord. Eventually all nations will come unto it. I think specifically the application is for the nation of Israel, but I think also there would be this understanding that down the road somewhere there's going to come a time when all people will have this same opportunity to revere God in that way, where He is to be revered, to be feared, to be honored and worshiped that way. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great observation. John says you go back to the 46th Psalm and he says, all nations, same idea here, all peoples. I think it's just saying that there's coming a time when everybody will have this opportunity. Now, obviously, one of the things that has been happening all through the history of God's interaction with mankind is that there have been those who witnessed His interaction. His greatness and His power was feared before the Israelites went into the land of Canaan. They had heard about this God. They knew about and they feared this God. So the idea is clear. It seems that there may be an application for just the Israelites, but for all peoples to have the opportunity to come to Him in that way. No. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would seem to indicate a reverence and a oneness of the unity of the body, so that you join hands together in some way, rather than what we sometimes think about clapping. I almost read it clasp hands, but I didn't. Okay, so in these verses you have the reasons for the king to be exalted or praised. In verses 2, 3, and 4, you have those reasons for Him to be praised. Now go down to verses 8 and 9. I know this is out of order, but look at verses 8 and 9, and you have more reasons for God to be exalted. God reigns over the nations. God sits on His holy throne. The princes of the peoples gather as the people of the God of Abraham. For the shields of the earth belong to God. He is highly exalted. So He says, you should join in worship. There should be this exaltation of the Lord Most High. He is to be feared. He is great. And 3 and 4 give you the reasons. He has subdued peoples, has all nations under His feet. He chose this heritage for us, and we should be proud of the fact that we are descendants of Jacob, whom He has proven His love for. Then He says in verses 5, 6, and 7, there needs to be more of this worship. God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. Sing praises to God, sing praises. Sing praises to our King, sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing praises with a psalm. Why? Verses 8 and 9. Because He reigns over the nation. He sits in His holy throne. The princes of the peoples gather as the people of the God of Abraham, for the shields of the earth belong to God. He is highly exalted. So you're talking about straightforward in the writing of this psalm. He says, worship Him, adore Him, honor Him, hold Him in great honor and high esteem, because. Then He says it again. Honor Him, worship Him, glorify Him, do what you need to do in order to demonstrate your love and your worship to Him, and here's why. And that's in verses 3 and 4 and verses 8 and 9. Now, what are your observations? What is the significance of the throne being pictured here and God being on His throne? What's the significance of that in the holy writing of the Old Testament? All right, who sits on a throne then? We'll go all the way back there.
King does.
A king, yeah, a king. So, I'm sorry?
King above all kings.
Oh yeah, okay. So he's not just a king, but as you describe, he's the king above all kings. And that's the emphasis there. He sits on His throne. He reigns over the nation. So throne and reign could be joined, couldn't they? Because it's the same idea. He reigns from his throne. He reigns. The Israelites had this interesting view. Sometimes they would look at God as being dwelling on the ark. That was a view. That was something that they were taught early. But now when you get into the Psalms, especially, his throne is in heaven. Sometimes it's even described as being in Zion. Well, we know it's not literally in Zion, so that seems to be another way of talking about the New Jerusalem or the heaven, that idea. So where God sits on his throne, the throne of God, as he looks out for, takes care of, and intervenes for his people. Psalm 46. Now Psalm 47, worship him, praise him, glorify him, present all in his presence because of what he does for you.
I think the phrase, the shields of the earth belong to him, it's in that idea, because it just made me think, what are the shields of the earth? But in that context of talking about the nations and talking about the princes, part of civil government is about protecting your people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can think about the nations or those princes as the shields, and even if you find protection, or you find a shield in these various, all those shields belong to God too.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same idea of him being on that ultimate throne.
Yeah, I think you're right. The idea would be true that each nation would have a specific shield. It could be the commanders, the kings, the princes, whoever would stand behind those shields. But the emphasis seems to be that he's just saying the same thing in another way, which is God's over. God is in control of all of those nations with all of those emblems on all those shields. They're his, every one of them.
If that's the case, that is very pertinent to our day and age.
It is, isn't it?
Just in terms of how quick we are to think that our government can protect us and solve problems and provide for us, and only in the context of what God provides.
Yes. Yeah, Gary's observation is sometimes we're very quick, I think especially in this Western world that we live in, we're very quick to jump to the conclusion that we believe our government can protect us. Only as far as God allows, is all I'll say. We don't know how far that is. I think that's interesting. Tamello brings up the fact that he mentions here that God rules over the nations. Would that be kind of an insertion there that would include everybody, and the Jews thought they were so exclusive that God's only caring about us? But in the writings of the Psalms, it's often talks about, as it began, all people, verse 1, all you people, because all you people are under my oversight. The heathen, yeah. Yeah. That would be even more of a slap, but yeah, they would look at all those other nations as being heathen anyway, so yeah, that's a good.
And that's where the word Gentile came from, the idea of the nations. So it's like there's us and then there's the nations.
Yeah. Yeah, it was not a kind description. So heathen would come from, okay, so there are Jews and then there's everybody else that's the heathen. Yeah.
Which is interesting, considering one of the main reasons why God set them apart was to be an example to the rest of the world and to bring the Christ to save the rest of the world. And yet you begin very quickly with the animosity toward the rest of the world.
Yeah, great observation. One of the reasons that God chose these people was for them to be an example of what God's people ought to be like. And yet it very quickly became much more of an arrogance and a mindfulness about our separation from everybody else rather than being an example and being able to teach the rest of the world what followers of God were actually to be like. Okay, anything else about Psalm 47 before we move on? I've got one, just don't have much time, but I didn't have much comment about Psalm 48, but I wanted to look at it very briefly. Any other comments about Psalm 47? Yeah, Ryan's question is, would this be something that would help the Israelites kind of hang on to the earthly Messiah view that he talks about reigning, and he talks about governing, and he talks about being over the nations? I think, yeah, a misunderstanding of these figures of speech that are used throughout the Old Testament that are talking about absolutely the opposite, which is he's in heaven reigning. And yeah. Good question. Okay, I think Psalm 48 goes with these two Psalms. Now, whether they were that way in the beginning with how they were used with the Israelites or not, I have no way of knowing particularly. But the ideas are very similar, because when you open up Psalm 48, now it's 14 verses long. We won't read it, but I wanted to give you some ideas, because really what Psalm 48 is talking about is God's defense of Zion. So Psalm 46 talked about God being there for us, our strength, our help. No matter what happens, no matter if the foundations of your world are shaken, God is there. Psalm 47 talked about God being a blessing to the nations. That's Psalm 46. Psalm 47, he talked about all the things he's done that demonstrate the fact that he deserves to be praised, to be worshiped. And now Psalm 48 really falls right in line there to talk about how God defends and delivers the people of Israel, highlighted by the fact that he describes it as Zion. God is described as great. Great is the Lord. That seems to be a center of this psalm, the very idea of him being great. Verse 1. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. That begins very straightforwardly, and that seems to be the heart of this psalm. So when you go home and read Psalm 48, just kind of pick up right there, and you'll understand that there is this admonition to praise him and to have joy, and for there to be joy in all the earth. And for the opposing kings to panic, because he is the great God, the God of all the earth. There's the very heart of this seems to be that look at verse 10. Verse 9, back up. We have thought on your steadfast love, O God, in the midst of your temple. As your name, O God, to your praise reaches to the ends of the earth. Your right hand is filled with righteousness. So there's the strength and the power and the amazing context of God's ability to care for his people. But God's love is to be known, his steadfastness is to be known, and it is a part of what would allow the people of Israel to look upon their heritage as having been protected by God himself. God's love is known. It is obvious. It is great. All right, read Psalm 48. Next week, we'll be on Psalm 54, 55, and 56. Appreciate your comments.